Blizzard Entertainment is a name synonymous with some of video gaming's biggest franchises, and for the first time, their biggest intellectual property is finally being adapted for the silver screen. Will this movie live up to the intense love and passion of its frenzied fanbase? Will it welcome newcomers as easily to those well-versed in its vast mythos? Well, I'll tell you in this spoiler-free review. As with all my reviews, I'll go over a brief plot synopsis, the good aspects, and the not-so-good. Here we go. Orcs and humans have been enemies for just about as long as either group can remember, and this story is focused around their first meeting. The orc homeworld is dying, so Gul'dan, an orc warlock, and the leader of the orcish horde, creates a portal for the strongest of their kind to invade the land of Azeroth and claim it for their own. Amongst the warband, the leader of the Frostwolf clan, Durotan, and his wife Draka hope to find a better world for their newly born son to live in. On the other side, we have Anduin Lothar, a commander of the Alliance, who meets a young mage named Khadgar, who attempt to stem the tide of this new enemy before they overtake the kingdom. As both sides fight for their own agendas, war is an inevitability. Let's put our best foot forward and start with what the movie did very well. To start, the CGI was actually quite amazing. I typically say use CGI sparingly, but for this, it worked very well. The orcs are particularly outstanding. Their facial expressions, their muscle movements, and presence were top drawer. On top of that, the props including armor, settings, and weapons look like they were ripped right out of the games. Each footman is clad in genuine armor, and that attention to detail really pops out. The fight scenes were good, even though they were somewhat hectic at times, and the special effects were all superb. They spared no expense. Out of all the characters, and there were a lot of them, Durotan really stood out to me. For being such an imposing creature, you can feel a lot of empathy towards his plight. Along with that, Durotan's involvement and just the inner workings of the orc society are fascinating to behold. Unlike the orcs in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, these orcs have codes of conduct and honor that they typically abide by. These interchanges between them could have been an entire movie all on their own, which I'm totally for. The last two things I want to mention are the music and the overall spectacle that this movie provides. The theme for the film, although repetitive, is this powerful beat with this aggressive orchestra that reminded me a little bit of Mad Max Fury Road, which is not a bad thing at all. To add to this are these sweeping shots of beautiful cities and landscapes that are quite reminiscent to the aforementioned Lord of the Rings movies. This is a movie that is best seen in a big movie theater with roaring speakers and a screen that just shows how big Azeroth truly is. Now, to the unfortunate aspects of the picture. First and foremost, the acting was a mixed bag, with Khadgar being the worst of the bunch. For some odd reason, it didn't feel like he was part of the world that Blizzard had created. To me, it felt like some guy they just put in a mage's costume and had him read lines. This ties in somewhat with the fact that the human faction is nowhere near as compelling as the orcs. Clearly, they weren't the focal point, and I would have been interested in seeing it from just the orc perspective, where the humans served as the biggest obstacle. I realize that Blizzard has fans on either side, but the indigenous people of Azeroth lack any real emotional substance or gravitas. To touch on a point I made earlier about having prior knowledge going into this movie, it isn't necessary, but it definitely helps. This movie is cram-packed with characters, settings, references, plot lines, and lore, which can be overwhelming. Even though people are typically opposed to longer runtimes in films, I feel that this particular instance, that the story would have benefited from one. Overall, Warcraft is a pretty good movie. It has a lot riding on it, seeing as not many video game movie adaptations typically produce standalone films of much merit. The visuals, music, attention to detail, special effects, nods to the games, and CGI are all excellent. Durotan provides a strong and interesting protagonist, and spending time in Azeroth is a true delight. What keeps this particular adaptation from true greatness is some lackluster performances from the humans, and the sheer amount of everything else that they pack into a 2-hour runtime. If you're a die-hard fan of Warcraft, let's face it, you've already seen it, but if you aren't, it might be worth a watch in theaters where it's meant to be viewed. Agree with my review? Let me know in the comments below and tell me which side you prefer in the constant struggle between orcs and humans. If you have time, feel free to check out our other offerings here on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch, and follow if you want to stay up to date with our most recent works. Also, our weekly podcast this week will touch on Warcraft and E3, as I try to explain to Joe what Warcraft is, and we tackle our favorite announcements from the show. Thanks everyone, take care. Just want to have a little final word here, and before we close out, a little tidbit for those who stayed after, but I just want to say this one thing for the people who made it this far. Griffins are amazing, and this film showed off one in particular you don't want to mess with. I feel like dragons are too dominant across all mediums and that griffins need their day in the sun. That is all.